I was out in a cabin in Virginia and woke up one morning and was looking out over the river and the sort of steam rising up from all of the forest around. And that was a moment of realization for me that was like, the thing that's going to be most sustainable is to do the thing that you enjoy doing. The thing that you enjoy doing is being out in nature, and that's what you love. There's always going to be not enough doctors. There's always going to be not enough people that are like working for global development or public health or impact in some way. There's always not enough of everything. So if that's the case, then anywhere that you put your effort and talent will be beneficial to the world in that area. I always knew that I wanted to have like impact some way. And then it just clicked for me and I said, well, if that's the case, then why don't you work to protect what you love? And that was when I decided to, work on nature and to be a conservationist and to work to protect nature and biodiversity in natural spaces. And the rest of my life has really been steered by that same directive ever since.
Thank you, River, for bringing Tom into the conservationist space.
That's it, yeah. The new River.
I'm Jessica Smith.
And I'm Diana Denken.
And this is Executives in the Wild, a podcast that interviews remarkable leaders and changemakers to understand why being connected to nature is so crucial to their happiness and professional success, and how it's helping them to make a positive difference in this world.
We want to showcase inspiring guests who have successfully integrated a connection to nature into their lives. We want to give our listeners a beacon of hope that there is a better way to lead in these uncertain times, one we can all lean into if only we dare to step into the wild. Our guest today is Tom Quigley, the founder of Superorganism, a venture capital firm for tech startups that benefit biodiversity. Tom is a coral reef conservationist turned startup operator and investor who has worked at the intersection of technology and nature for his entire career. He has advised many early-stage teams through Superorganism and through his past work at Conservation X Labs, as well as supporting nonprofits such as Ocean Visions, Key Conservation, and more. Previously, Tom was employee number 2 at Real Vision, a video-on-demand platform for investors where he ran operations, then growth. Originally a conservationist with a biology degree from Emory University, Tom has spent years doing remote coral reef fieldwork in Australia, Madagascar, and the Cayman Islands. He's a ski instructor, dive master, rock climber, freediver, backpacker, and aspiring mountaineer, surfer, and kite surfer. In essence, Tom is a true nature lover. Warm welcome, Tom, to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Great. Well, Tom, it really sounds like your love of nature started early, but take us through the story. How did you first fall in love with nature, and how has it influenced your career path so far?
Thanks, Jessica and Diana, for having me on. I grew up on a farm in North Carolina, and the way I was raised was one of those traditional types of, out of the house at 8 a.m. and back in when the sun is set. And so I spent probably the first 8 years of my life running around barefoot out in the woods and in barns. And it was a really great way to grow up. And so my most formative memories of being young are all out in nature, running around on a farm and in the wild. As I grew up and went into high school, we moved to New Hampshire, and the playground there of the White Mountains, and in the summer there was hiking, and the winter there was skiing. In college, I was introduced to rock climbing, and I learned there was plenty of rock climbing in New Hampshire as well. And so I was really spoilt for choice. And, there was snow for 5-6 months out of the year. And so if you're not going outdoors in it, then you just stay indoors for that whole time. And so it was always something for me to continue to pursue and do as an activity, and helps me just get out of the house and spend time with friends and rebalance in a really important way. So through my life, I've had kind of 4 or 5 year obsession periods where in high school, it was very much skiing. For about 4 or 5 years, I was a ski instructor through high school and into college a bit. And then in college, I discovered rock climbing, and I was completely obsessed with that for about 4 or 5 years, traveled all over the US climbing. And then when I graduated and started work in marine conservation, I was completely obsessed with diving, and I traveled and worked for scuba diving, picked up freediving along the way. But now I'm in my I think I'm looking for my next 4 or 5 year outdoor obsession. So all of those other hobbies are extremely aspirational, I would say.
Surfing.
That's gotta be, I feel like living in California, especially, I just need to fully lean into the trope.
Mm-hmm. And embrace the wetsuit, Tom.
That's right.
Well, you already described how your relationship with nature evolved over time, from childhood through the various hobbies and obsessions. If you think about how you connect to nature today, do you have any habit or ritual or routine that helps you to connect to nature on a regular basis? For
me, my work, I'm a very kind of single-minded person. And when I start working, I just kind of lock into that. And so for me, it's less of I probably don't have the best habits around it. And I have more of I'm completely locked in this, and then all of a sudden I look up like gasping for air and need to immediately run off feral into the woods somewhere to be able to plug back in like a battery and recharge. And so habits that I want to improve on are going for walks. And I fortunately live in San Francisco, where there's so much great outdoors things around me. 10-minute walk from the water and looking out over the bay, 20-minute drive from Marin and being able to hike through the hills and the headlands there. There's parks all around the Presidio. And so just being able to really carve out that hour of the day to get down to the water, get out to the park, whatever it is, to really get that dose and then bring it back. I also have been nomadic since pretty much 2012. I'm a little bit more sedentary now than I was based in San Francisco, but it's the hub at the center, and then go out and spend time. And so I'll often do that directly around nature activities where possible. So in 2023, I spent 4 months skiing and traveling, and so working all hard through the week and some of the weekend, and then first chair and last chair in Banff, and then in Salt Lake City. And that was the year too that Salt Lake had about 900 inches of snow. So I think we did 13 different mountains and maybe 30 odd days on snow through the whole season, which was really, really terrific.
And do you think the seasonality affects your work, the way you work, or your productivity in any ways? Or is there any seasonality to your work life?
There's definitely seasons to work. There are some periods of time that are more intense and some that are more relaxed. VC as an industry is notorious for taking time off in like August, and it's just impossible to get people, and people are at Burning Man, and so it's the little summer lull in the VC world, which was very strange for me coming into VC. And I was like, come on, let's go. Like,
yeah, I was going to say, I've only seen you in tents.
Yeah.
That means we never interacted in August.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And then, and the winter as well, there's the notorious trope for VCs is like, oh, I have to make this quick. I'm about to get off the chairlift in Jackson. But I think that for me, the seasonality of skiing is, if anything, I go out pretty hard, pretty hard when I'm going. Like I'm not rocking up at 10 or 11 and then like taking a long lunch and then breaking at 2 to après. I mean, if we're going skiing, then we're going to go like first chair to last chair, and we're going to be like in the woods doing tough stuff for the whole day, basically. And so, I mean, the end of last season, in the 1st of May, I think was the last ski day I did at Brighton in Utah. And I remember getting down and basically just collapsing because I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I made it through the season with both my knees intact. Oh, thank goodness. And so, there is an aspect of where it does give you energy back and it does rejuvenate you, and just reorients you to be able to continue to pursue your work and not just be locked at your desk. But also there's an energy expenditure aspect as well, where coming back from some of those trips or going into the week, sometimes you're like, I need a vacation from my vacation because I'm wrung out.
Yeah. Well, I think when you spend that intense amount of time in nature, of course, you can focus on the sports aspect where you're like really pushing your boundaries, the limits of your body. But there could be other times when you're much more in a receiving mode, like observing what is there out in nature and what's happening. And so I'm really wondering if you have had, or if you can recall a moment in nature that led to some unexpected insights or a sense of spirituality, or where you felt that the way you think about life is changing now.
Yeah, definitely. That's been coral diving for me. Diving is where something like skiing and climbing is really much more of a intense sport type of approach. It's hard to be like intense about diving. It's actually much more about just completely relaxing and being chill and, watching your air consumption. And so, especially when you're diving like in nice warm waters with no currents. I lived in the Cayman Islands for 4 years, and this is just like diving in an aquarium every single day, 200-foot visibility in the summers, no currents, warm water, and just some of the areas that you could go down and dive on it's like taking a walk through a garden created by Dr. Seuss, and being able to really just take that time. I mean, it was a really counterbalance during an important time in my life when I worked at my first startup in 2014. Called Real Vision, and it was very intense. I was treating that like I came from the world of conservation, and so I had no business experience whatsoever. I'd never taken a business class, and I had this opportunity as employee number 2 of this startup, and none of us knew what we were doing. So it was, okay to just give it our best shot on everything, but like what we were putting in the effort and really long yards, and so I was working probably, 6.5 days a week and long hours each day. And I needed something on that other side to be able to counterbalance that. And so I spent a lot of my off time diving, and being able to just go down and go for that walk through the garden at that time was really, really important to me. So coral and scuba diving has always been that meditative, like I'm just going to go and I'm going to sit for an hour and I'm going to be in my thoughts and let that just kind of the salt water trickle through and come out a much calmer and more focused person. It's like moving meditation for me. And it really is the closest thing you could do to flying. Especially with very clear water like that, where you're just soaring over the top of this enormous landscape of towers and tunnels. And I had a moment in 2009, I think, where I was in college and I was trying to decide what to do with my life. And when you're in college, at least I felt like I had, like, you can either be a doctor or a lawyer or a business. Like, it's just, it's like the picture book when you open when you're a kid. Like, here are your career options. Like, pick one of these two. Didn't even know that conservation was a career path at that point. And I was out in at a cabin in Virginia and woke up one morning and was looking out over the river and the sort of steam rising up from all of the forest around. And that was a moment of realization for me that was like, the thing that's going to be most sustainable is to do the thing that you enjoy doing. The thing that you enjoy doing is being out in nature, and that's what you love. There's always going to be not enough doctors. There's always going to be not enough people that are like working for global development or public health or impact in some way. There's always not enough of everything. So if that's the case, then anywhere that you put your effort and talent will be beneficial to the world in that area. I always knew that I wanted to have like impact some way. And then it just clicked for me, and I said, well, if that's the case, then why don't you work to protect what you love? And that was when I decided to, work on nature and to be a conservationist and to work to protect nature and biodiversity in natural spaces. And the rest of my life has really been steered by that same directive ever since.
Thank you, River, for bringing Tom into the conservation space.
That's it. Yeah. The new River.
Great. Well, I think all of us have experienced that, wanting to work on nature, and, I would say it's still an emerging career. Some of my family members, my uncle and my cousins worked in protected areas management and really remote, challenging circumstances. And when I said I wanted to work on nature conservation too, I think my family was a bit like, are you, are you going to do that? But these new types of career paths have come about, and, they've not been linear. So I'm sure you've faced, many big challenges and big questions, beyond the one that you outlined. So do you have other examples where, you were able to turn to nature to kind of, change your course? And, do you think that connection to nature makes you more resilient as a decision maker?
I started freediving in 2000 and I guess 15. I was living in the Cayman Islands. I was working at the startup, and the Cayman is a really exceptional place to freedive because as an island, it basically goes from the seafloor and then just juts straight up. And so there are these really amazing walls that drop off almost totally vertically. There's an area you can go to in Little Cayman where it is a 90-degree wall, and it'll go from like sort of 40 feet, 60 feet, 80 feet, 1,000 feet right away. I mean, it's and you can swim away from the wall and look back, and it looks like the wall from Game of Thrones because you can just see so much of it. It's immense. And so that makes for really great freediving. You can swim a couple of 100 feet offshore. You can hook up your float and drop a line 200 feet and then just go up and down it. And so it's a really, really, you can get to depth very quickly. It's warm and super clear. And so and basically no current. So it's a really nice place to learn to freedive. And I had a friend who was an instructor. He put me through my first level, and we would, my trick for learning all of these sports has been find someone who's obsessed and wants to go all the time, and then be available all the time to go with them. And you'll learn a lot that way. And so, whenever he picked up the phone and was like, do you want to go diving today? Which for him was like every single day. He learned that I was one of the most available, and we started going out all the time. And so I was the work was stressful. The startup was very intense. It was intense in a very different way than I had known before. I put a lot of pressure on myself, and freediving was really helpful in helping me go, you've got this. Because the freediving is a practice of just like calming your nervous system. And as soon as when you go for the first time and you try to hold your breath and you go down, you're like, oh my God, there's like 30 feet of water on top of me pressing down into 60 feet. You can't hold your breath for more than like a minute or two. And it's just your body is reacting. And the urge, just the nervous system urge to breathe from freediving doesn't actually come from a lack of oxygen. It's a buildup of carbon dioxide. And so you have the oxygen, like you have the capability to stay longer. It's just your body screaming at you to go to the surface. And the more you do it, the more you learn, hey, that's okay. I can be under this pressure, and your body physically learns that it's okay, and it stops screaming. And you get more and more time underwater, and it puts you into these like yoga meditative states where you do a breathe up before you get into the water. You lay on the surface of the water, you take your mask off so the cold water touches all of the neurons on your face, and it helps put your brain into a new space. And you just breathe through your snorkel for 10 minutes, laying on the surface, holding onto a float. Coming out of that, I swear to God, my, pulse will drop 20 points just sitting there on the surface. And you come out in this total Zen state, take your first few breaths and drop down to 60 feet and just stay there for like 3 minutes. And the feeling of being able to, drop from a high stress state into this, you're good. And just to calm down the frazzled neurons in those kind of more excited, stressful states was a really valuable thing for me to do. At the same time as during work, I was in those states all the time. And so both from that kind of physiological level of being able to just drop in a little bit, but also to just go, you're getting stressed out over emails. Yesterday, you were under 150 feet of water and did a 5-minute breath hold in the pool. You can do emails.
Yeah, that's very wise. Something you said earlier, the pressure that you're under is so much more in the water, and you can withstand that. And it's a good lesson to practice that, to then face other types of pressures and put them in perspective. So that's beautiful and very thoughtfully observed.
Yeah. It's that operating calmly in very chaotic situations. I mean, that's like a mainstay of nature, kind of outdoors survivability. And, if you're in an emergency situation out there. I was also at that time, I was doing some combat sports. I was training for, I did my first earned belt in Krav Maga and my first earned belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And that was also very much the same thing where you go, all right, yesterday there was a 200-pound guy with his arm across my throat, and you just have to be under that active pressure and just calmly figure it out. And that was the same type of lesson in those work scenarios, where it's just one, it's not that bad. It's not that, it's emails. And two, yes, you're under that pressure. You have to work through it and remain calm and not let your nervous system get the better of you.
And it's also about the ability to connect back to your body to read those nervous system signals before they escalate, before you feel like, oh, I have to run away, spend the week in the woods. Like, you pick up as it builds, as it escalates, and then you can calm yourself. Then you can come back to the body or to the breathing, as Jessica was saying. And it's just so grounding to do that.
Yeah, I mean, this is definitely something that I am still working on through my life is, rather than these big like nature binges, where am I able to, incorporate more in slices of every day or every week to make sure that I'm getting continual top ups rather than, drawing down on the battery and then going and fully recharging.
That's so well said. And, one of our guests actually have been talking about this shifting baseline syndrome that we all suffer from, where your baseline of what nature looks like is already a degraded state compared to generations before you. So as we are thinking about regenerating the planet, we need to have a little bit of an imagination to even being able to envision what an abundant nature can look like, so that we don't just say that we're going to stop the degradation or we're going to set the baselines at the state where it is today. And I'm really wondering how do you envision that future relationship between humans and nature in an optimistic scenario?
I really like that example because I think that the shifting baseline is a really actually good way for us to think about reframing, right? If the nature that you knew from when you were a child, that maybe you think about your experience with nature in some area that you feel like was most abundant and wild. If that was less than your parents and grandparents and their parents, then even in your most wild memory, you can still keep going. You can turn that volume up even more. Like, just think about how much more nature and envision that there could be, right? Because there already was. And that's even within living memory. And when we started recording nature and things like that, we know that there were significant extinctions driven as soon as humans started, moving into North America and South America. Those extinctions of the megafauna happen at the exact same time in the geologic, the fossil record. Obviously, that's not a perfect heuristic because, extinction is not distributed equally and population loss across species is not distributed equally. But as a way to reframe and think about like what the optimistic version is, just take that scene of like your wildest and just Photoshop in more birds, 4 times as many birds, and an overwhelming cacophony of insects buzzing through the light, and more deer or kangaroo or zebra or whatever. Like, just put more animals in there, put more species in there than even feels realistic in your mind. And it's possible. Like, it has happened. So even what you remember, like, nature has an enormous regenerative capability in the decadal timescale, which is, a really hard way to think about things like, climate, which is much more of a 100-year kind of cycle that we're trying to work on. But we have decadal powers to drive those populations back up and into that level of abundance. And so it's like, let's talk about radical abundance. Let's talk about what that looks like, not just in wild spaces. Like, let's talk about redwoods in the city. And let's talk about like animals and birds and nature, human integrated. Like, why don't we paint those kind of solar punk, nature punk style stories, cities, wild spaces? And so I really do think that, you can tell that story of that chart and the decline of species and be like, hey, the line goes like that. I don't know if I'm flipped, whichever. The line goes like that. Like, that's where you are in the chart. Great. Well, that means the world can support up to like that much more, which is twice as much as what you even remember at the time. Let's go that way, right? Let's just imagine what it looks like up here and not be like, oh, it's going to keep going down. Absolutely not. Like, we can do whatever we want. So let's do that. And that's where, you can start to reframe from just this powerless, like I am, we're just all going downhill and it's all going to be the road, to like, let's talk about what it looks like to like cover the world in green.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Tom, do you feel that the love of nature is the key to regenerating the planet? Is that the secret sauce that we all need, is to fall in love with nature so that we can imagine this more abundant future?
Yeah, I think it's necessary but not sufficient. And honestly, I don't even know that it's necessary for everyone. Like, I'm a big systems change believer. I think that a lot of conservation and nature work in the past has been like, oh, if people just cared more and like we just got more people to be like to love nature. Like for me, it was a prerequisite for my career focused on conservation. I was always at aquariums or zoos or out in nature doing outdoor sports, and I decided to do work. And I was in a position where I was able to make that decision. But most people, many people in the world aren't, one. And two, many people in the world rely on nature directly for their needs, for their basic needs. And so, you can't say to someone whose entire protein intake is fish from a reef that they can't do that anymore because you're taking away from nature. Like, we have to have, that their housing and building materials coming from trees and local areas. You can't tell people like, no, you can't do that anymore. And so it's not enough for everyone to just love and care about nature. It's important for many people to activate and to continue to recharge and refill that well of why we do what we do. But the most important thing for us to do is change the systems that we work within. And that doesn't necessarily mean that everyone needs to care so deeply and like pause at the checkout counter and imagine the fate of the plastic bag as it goes into the ocean and the turtle, and then go, I'm going to do like paper for the turtles. Like, I don't care if you do or don't. Like, I just want you to have one simple option and you not even think about it. And then, it was the good nature option the whole time. Good for you.
To streamline that, to make it as easy as possible in the decision-making process. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Great. So Tom, we'd love to know, what do you do personally to give back to nature, whether financially or otherwise?
Me and my business partner, Kevin Webb, founded Superorganism, which was the first ever venture capital fund entirely dedicated to biodiversity. And our thesis is that market solutions can be an incredible tool to be able to stop biodiversity loss at the root, in thinking about so much of the materials and waste and drivers of loss, direct extraction. The reasons for biodiversity loss in the first place come in many cases from industry. And venture capital is actually a nice map to the types of solutions that we need to drive in terms of the global scale and the speed. These are talking about global solutions that we can put into place in under 10 years. And that's really the types of solutions that we need. We listen to the science and the projections of where we're going with everything. And so previously that approach, when applied in impact, had certainly climate tech has been approaching this in a way to work within all industries and provide, things that are just better, cheaper, cleaner, faster. So just pure value driven businesses, but also that have that level of, it reduces the drivers of climate change. It's cleaner. It's just better environmentally or for humans. And that hadn't really been applied to biodiversity yet, in thinking, the companies were out there, but to have that dedicated approach and say, we're going to work within industries and we're going to reduce the drivers of biodiversity loss within those industries. And we're going to do it by creating value and doing things that are better, cheaper, faster, and also that reduce drivers of loss. And so we founded Superorganism, and launched last year in 2023. We invest in early stage founders that are working to support biodiversity in many different ways. We've got 17 companies in the portfolio right now, and these are hardware, software, biotech, materials. We have a company that creates luxury leather out of invasive species. We have a company that creates synthetic seeds for tree restoration to solve the seed shortfall for forest restoration. We have a company that does thin film plastics out of seaweed. We have a company that does robots to plant seagrass. I mean, it is a really wide range of things that we support. And in all of those companies, we really want to see that there's a pathway to a really strong global benefit to biodiversity. Yeah. So everything that we do is oriented around nature and the benefits to nature, and also inspiration, like being able to showcase those companies to convince more founders or people to work on nature and biodiversity loss as a problem set, and to take new and innovative technology approaches, innovative behavioral approaches, entrepreneurship within large corporations around nature. And it's been an amazing journey over the past few years, launching Superorganism, supporting the incredible founders that we work with. I'm continually inspired and supported by their work, and I see myself as nothing but a lightning rod to be able to continue to channel attention and money towards their work, and will continue to be doing so for decades to come.
May it be so. I'm so inspired by your mission. I've been following it in the past year or two, and it's been remarkable, you know, the whole network that you built around it, and met some of the founders that you were talking about. It's truly, truly inspiring people. So Tom, final question. What has been the greatest lesson that nature and time spent in nature has taught you?
I think that we individually are all still quite small, that we have, you know, the immensity of nature when you're out alone on a reef or in a mountain range is really clear, and that you feel like the things in your life are maybe not as momentous or hard or painful or huge as they feel. The world is much bigger, but also that, you know, knowing what we have done as a species to nature and to the planet and to other species here, that despite that immensity, one person can still, and many people can still, have an enormous impact. And that can be an impact for net negative overall, which is the path that we have gone down so far. But there's no reason that needs to continue, and that there's no reason that can't be a path for net positive. So both feeling small in the immensity of nature, but also feeling powerful in the ability to shape the future.
That's beautiful closing words.
Well, not quite closing, because we have a final round of quick fire questions before we let you go. And we just ask the same questions, the same 4 to all our guests to close out the interview. So first of all, Tom, where is your favorite place in nature?
I have a really special place in my mind, which is the reef that I did my dive master on in Australia, which was called Moore Reef. And I worked with a company called Reef Magic, and I would go out 4 or 5 times a week and dive 3 or 4 times a day. I would also go out with the marine biologists at James Cook University and dive with them. And so I got to do some really unique night dives, morning dives. I was out there on a solar eclipse once. And that reef, there's a couple of places. My favorite dive site of all time is a place called Pressure Point, where there's a cut it's a big horseshoe-shaped reef. And there's this cut in the reef where the tide would, come in and wash out. And when it was coming in, it was super, super clear, and it just kind of broke on this point like a wedge. And you could go down there and just drop it there. And oh my God, it was always just rush hour with sharks and unicorn fish and giant Napoleon wrasse and oceanic trout. And, you would go down there and you could just sit there for 20 minutes and just see crisscrossing. And that was a dive we would do basically every day. And it was always a real spectacle. So that's one of my favorite places. Another of that same reef, there was a little hidden section. It was quite shallow. You could go through a little tunnel and get to a patch of sand surrounded by coral, maybe 15 feet across in a circle. And I would sometimes, between dives on a busy day, just drop solo and go into that little spot and just sit there in the sand in completely clear water as the light would shimmer and fish coming around and through the coral. And that's a place I go to in my mind quite a lot.
I don't blame you. I think that's clear why. And what is one place in nature that you have not yet visited but would really love to?
The bottom of the ocean. I would really love in my lifetime.
That's unexpected.
I would love in my lifetime to do a 4,000 foot submersible, some type of real deep ocean dive. If I could be so lucky for it to actually be down to even deeper, to truly be into an area of like real abyssal richness, a vent or something really insane. I just don't know that would be possible, but in my lifetime, I would really like to do a very deep ocean submersible dive.
Go with the pros.
Yeah.
I was also thinking it would be neat to do that as virtual reality. If someone set a camera down and then could create a virtual reality experience, that would be...
I was looking at a place in Roatan that you could do. And there are virtual reality experiences that you can do, but there was at least at one point a commercial vessel that you could go down in Roatan. I haven't done it yet. So one of these days, eventually in my lifetime.
Okay. So Tom, how about a favorite piece of art, book, poetry, or film that connects you to nature?
My favorite nature film of all time is Princess Mononoke. It's a film by Studio Ghibli, directed by Hayao Miyazaki. Really comes from, him and his incredible mind. And it feels almost like an indigenous folk tale, like very archetypal messaging around humans and nature and industrialization, and all of the tensions therein. It's also one of the most beautiful and beautifully filmed, or not filmed. It's an anime. It is my favorite movie of all time, and the nature themes throughout are just extremely powerful. That's by far.
As in, many Miyazaki movies have that.
Many Miyazaki movies, yeah. And by far, it's the style of movie that is like, it's very unique, but by far, that's my favorite nature movie.
I have to rewatch it.
I have never seen it, so I have have to go download it.
I'm going to rewatch it in theaters next week. They have occasionally Studio Ghibli will do these festivals and they'll come into cities and you can see it in cinema, which is really exciting.
Great.
You're so lucky. I'm rarely jealous, but this is one moment. And so what is one thing you would recommend for our listeners who want to better connect to nature?
I think there's more nature close to people than people expect. Mm-hmm. And so, and now there are more ways to engage with and understand nature than ever before using technology. And so, I would encourage people to spend more time with the parks nearby them and to find the spots of nature wherever they are and to use tools like Seek by iNaturalist on your phone to start really looking at what things are there, because we can walk by these patches of grass, but when you actually go and you start looking for different bugs, you start looking for different types of, you notice things and you see things and things that you didn't even think were there because it was just a plot of land. Yeah. Tools like Merlin to be able to identify the birds' songs around you and what birds are near you. And Seek are incredible ways to interface with nature and to see it in a new way. And so
Seek, you can take a picture of a plant and it tells you what plant is it, right?
Yeah, correct. And Merlin, you can listen to, you just set the audio recording on your phone. And as soon as it hears a bird, it will identify what bird that is for you.
Oh my God, I love that.
Nice. Okay.
And so, those two alone are really amazing ways to unveil what types of nature is really around you without, that is often goes unseen. And so using tools like that and trying to discover the areas around you that, have those pockets of nature and trying to look closely at and deeply and listen in those areas to, rediscover where there are, it's not humans and nature, like in separate areas. We are embedded within that web, and being able to recenter ourselves as such is important.
I'm going to download them straight away.
Me too. And really, Tom, thank you so much. I've personally come away with so much from this conversation. I hope others have too. Really, thank you so much for sharing your time with us. It was great.
Thank you both so much.
Wow, Diana, that was such an interesting interview with Tom. I took so much away from it. What did you think?
Yeah, likewise. I've known him for a couple of years now, but he always amazes me what a thoughtful thinker he is and the depth of his experience. I mean, it was just a fascinating discussion.
From the journey that he outlined, I thought what was really powerful was the freediving. When he was talking about being under so much pressure in the water, and then, coming back to, emails, which, I feel stressed by emails. I think most people do. But, being able to, come back from that, physical pressure into this more abstract pressure and being able to put that in perspective and take a step back. I just found that was really thoughtful how he described it.
I also really love the example that he said at the end, that spending time in the vast nature, in a natural landscape, just shows you as a little human in the big nature.
Yeah.
And it also puts you into perspective, I think, and especially the problems and the challenges in your life, they seem to dissipate somehow. When we're in a closed environment, we are the center of the universe, in your home, at your office desk. So all your thoughts are really close, but you step out into the wild, into the wilderness and in nature, and you realize that I'm just this tiny little human in this big wide universe. I think it's so good for many people tell the same story of reconditioning.
Yeah. And, he painted that picture of, vast wild nature and geological time, but he also highlighted urban biodiversity as well. So, Tom is someone who's, spent his whole career thinking about nature and biodiversity. And I felt that came out so strongly in the interview.
Yeah. And I mean, likewise, the way he wants us to think about the future is to reimagine the wilderness that's possible, and to really tone up the wildest dreams of how many animals and birds and insects can you imagine in a given space. And then he also extrapolated that onto cities, saying, why cannot cities have more wilderness in the future? I really love that.
Yeah. So really just a brilliant interview, and
inspirational.
Very inspirational.
Thank you, Tom.
So I'm Jessica Smith.
And I'm Diana Duncan.
And this has been Executives in the Wild with our guest Tom Quigley this week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Executives in the Wild is created by Diana Denke, Jessica Smith, and Robin Agustin. Those involved in the podcast are doing so in a personal capacity, and views expressed are not necessarily associated with their employers. You can follow us on LinkedIn and Instagram at Executives in the Wild, or go to executivesinthewild.com, where you can sign up to be a part of our community. Please support us by subscribing and sharing this podcast, available on YouTube and most outlets including Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you soon.